Hello my friends and welcome, I am Artifexus, you can call me Artie, and this, focus damn it, there we go. This is my first ever Ultramarines Phobos Librarian, and my first ever attempt at a glowing effect. Pretty cool. In this video, I'm going to show you the steps that I took, and of course, the paints that I used in order to achieve this fine fellow. A quick disclaimer, while this video does show the process I used to do this fellow up, it is not intended as a tutorial. That would imply that I have sufficient knowledge and wisdom to apply said knowledge to teach you guys. No, this is more of a walkthrough, showing the thought processes of an amateur painter painting a Phobos Librarian. However, in case anyone really likes how this guy looks, I am being thorough in how I did it, so you could follow along if you want, but yeah, disclaimer out the way. So without further ado, let's get into the paints that I used. They are listed in the description below, and if you want to skip past this bit, skip to here or use the timestamps. But either way, for the sake of thoroughness, Abaddon Black, Administratum Grey, Averland Sunset, Baharoth Blue, Blue Horror, Calgar Blue, Corax White, Dawnstone, Deathclaw Brown, Eshin Grey, Evil Sunz Scarlet, Fenrisian Grey, Flash Gitz Yellow, Flayed One Flesh, Leadbelcher, Liberator Gold, Macragge Blue, Mechanicus Standard Grey, Mephiston Red, Mournfang Brown, Pallid Wych Flesh, Rakarth Flesh, Retributor Armour Gold, Screaming Skull, Scrag Brown, Sotek Green, Stormhost Silver, Temple Guard Blue, Wraithbone, Uriel Yellow. So that's the straight up base and layer paints I use, but there's also the shades, which are as follows. Agrax Earthshade, Colia Green Shade, Nuln Oil, Reichland Flesh Shade, Seraphim Sepia. But in addition, I also used a dry brush paint, Terminatus Stone, and lastly, a technical Astro Granite. And of course there is the primer paint I used, which is Chaos Black Primer, in a spray can no less. For the record, I'll also have the paints I use as I use them flash up on screen, so don't worry too much about keeping track of everything. Right, and without further ado, let's do this noise. I begin, of course, by eagerly opening up the Librarian package. We find there's only one sheet inside, which is always slightly disappointing. We like there to be more stuff to build, but here all. So I snip off the cloak, of course, snip off the shoe, of course, and then after a nice bit of cleaning up, scraping up, all that good jazz, we firmly stick them together, and it's already looking good. Best foot forward and all that jazz. We then promptly stick the back to the front, and then with that done, he's able to finally stand on his own 2 feet. Marvellous. Then, after another nice bit of clean up, scrape up, all that good jazz up, we then, after struggling with the hood, I mean, all that fabric and whatnot, always fun to scrape at, we then glue the head onto the body, and hallelujah, he can now finally see. I then snip off the sword arm, and it is such a dope sword, I must say. I would love a sword like that in real life. Hook me up someone, will ya? And then obviously after that, he ain't a Space Marine without the pauldron, so after snipping that off, cleaning that up, gluing it up, and sticking it on, he's already really starting to look the part now. We then promptly stick on his magic fingers. Some real fedora tipping goodness here, milady. For real guys, if you're going to tell me that this guy is not tipping an imaginary fedora, I'd say you blind. Then on goes the backpack, and then on goes the book, because he's a librarian, and he needs a book. Then of course he's stuck onto his fancy platform, because you're not a fancy character without a fancy platform to stand on, are ya? Then of course the platform is promptly stuck to the base. I use super glue for this because plastic cement doesn't get on well with the bases. And with that, he's looking ready to go. I'm so psychic I don't have to look at you to get you. Ya, ya, ya. Sweet, so now that this guy is built, it's prime time, baby. And indeed, I primed him using a spray can of Chaos Black Primer. It's my favorite so far, because more or less whatever color you use, it can make some underlying shadows, so it's very cool. I like it. And the priming is done, and the Chaos Black coat looks absolutely super smooth and divine. Very excited to get the first layers down and on this bad boy. Of course, it's an ample time to show off the new camera angle and the new gloves I have to keep my grubby mitts from getting my models all grubby. Excellent stuff. Come on. Ah, there we are. I also get to use my painting handle. I've had it since the beginning, but never really had a chance to use it with my camera angles. Now is the chance. And it's also my first time I get to use Lahmian Medium, which I decided to decant into a dropper bottle in order for me to easier measure out the amount that I'm using, per drop rather than per scoop, if you would. I'd like to think this goes without saying, but just to be clear, you don't have to use Lahmian Medium like I did to achieve these colours. I just used this as an opportunity to try it out. Using water is absolutely fine. Though for those curious, and as best my understanding of it goes, Lahmian Medium is effectively, much like the paints I'm using, it's effectively a medium and pigment. It's like colourless paint, if you would. The point be, if you were to mix paint with water, it thins it down, but it also thins out the colour. But because Lahmian Medium has pigment in it that takes on the colour that you put into it while thinning it down. Kind of like a best of both worlds deal, you know what I mean? Yeah, so again, it is not necessary in the slightest to do this, but if you get a chance to use it, I recommend it. It's dope. So, with that all done and dusted, first we go to mix it with Macragge Blue in my wet palette. I did 4 scoops of Macragge Blue in the end and a single drop of Lahmian Medium. I mix it all up, and it's looking good and ready to go. And thus, I apply it to the model. It's already feeling very positive, although a bit runnier than I expected. I was concerned it might cause an issue. I mean, it presents some challenges in and of itself when you use runny paints. I added a single blob more of Macragge Blue in the end, and that made it, in my opinion, absolutely perfect. And I was super pleased with the results. It was super smooth, super divine. It was just a joy to use, as it just ran where I wanted it to go, and it was a joy to look at when it was all finished. I mean, look at that. It's just, it's lovely. Even from here. And even better from here. Absolutely lovely. We then jump into trying it with Mournfang Brown, which again, I did mix with Lahmian Medium, and it got the same results. Lovely, excellent application of some nice thin coats. First we began with the gloves, of course, his nice thick leather gloves on all sides, and then we moved on to the leather tunic he has underneath his cloak, which had some challenges, but it was done well, and then of course his leather-bound book, which was looking nice and dope. Next we jump in with Wraithbone. This is for the cloak. I know that the cloak traditionally has that dark tech camo kind of look about it, but that frankly looks hard and scary. So I decided instead to go for a more traditional monk-like drab robe, which I began with a layer here, as you can see, with Wraithbone. It was drifting a little towards Dark Angels, perhaps, but I decided in the end, it's going to be worth it, because it's a pretty sick cloak, whoever's wearing it. The Ultramarines are worthy of it too. In the end, I did 2 layers, if my memory serves me, 2 layers of this fine Wraithbone, which is also mixed with Lahmian Medium, I must add. After a brief Nurgle invasion, which we promptly managed to evade, and then pull away the remains of what he left, we got back to adding Wraithbone to the parchments. After adjusting some lighting to try and get everything looking absolutely dandy, we continue onwards with the extra second layer, resulting in a lovely, lovely smooth coat. Well, robe, I should say. I then also applied it to the face as well, ready for the future shading it will receive. It was a bit of a nuisance for some reason, but we got there eventually with some harsh talking to. I also forgot to do the brown on the straps on the backpack, which was, well, trust me, that'll be a recurring theme. Me forgetting things. I then decided to add a quick extra layer to the browns that were already there, just to help give them that extra smoothness. And then of course, with another Nurgle invasion and some footsie squeezers, we then moved on to adding the Administratum Grey to the sword blade. It was 2 layers of mediumed Administratum Grey, followed by 1 layer of mediumed Fenrisian Grey. I then moved to adding black into the joints, and also onto various places like the straps and around the outside edge of his pistol holster. Looking really quite nice. I then add a bit of Mephiston Red to the cord going from his upper arm to lower arm, don't know why it's there, and then we jump to Leadbelcher, beautiful Leadbelcher, to start adding the metallics onto him. Obviously there's the backpack with the vents and the exhaust and all that good jazz. I also went around the rim of the exhaust, as you can see there with the Leadbelcher, before moving on to do the book buckles and the belt buckles. It's all looking very dope. I was very, very pleased with it, despite the lighting being awkward. We then moved on to Retributor Armour Gold. If you don't like this colour, there is something wrong with you. Of course, there's a Nurgle invasion. He absolutely loves this gold, so why don't you too, right? I do the sword's hilt, I do the pommel, and I also do the outer metal casings of the book, really make it look regal and divine, before going to, of course, the edge of the pauldron. This is when the Ultramarine really starts to shine. I then also do his pendant, of course, and now he's looking ready for Rakarth Flesh, which is the layer I add to the cloak. Starts looking a bit skin-coloured maybe, but regardless, it's all part of the process. A process of looking as dope as this. Takes time and effort, don't you know? But again, with Lamia Medium, it all just flows super nicely, super evenly, and with 2 coats usually, it's perfectly divine. I then add a little of the Rakarth Flesh to the parchments as well, not too much mind, just a little bit. And then, of course, to the face itself. A little awkward, but it worked. Now, before we continue, for this next bit we're about to do involving the psychic tubes, and something else as well later down the line, I want to give a special thanks and shout out to TableTopReady here on YouTube. This guy is an actual pro. The works he creates is phenomenal, mind-blowing. Before painting my Librarian, I watched his video about painting his Librarian in Terminator armor. Not quite the same, I know, but near as damn it. In order to give me a few ideas about how I could do certain things, but I took way more from it than I had originally intended to get, so that's a sign of a skilled painter, in my opinion. So guys, if you are looking for tutorials from someone who actually knows how to paint, then I strongly recommend you go and check out TableTopReady. He knows what he's doing, and he is worthy of your time. So, off you go. After this video, of course. Yes, here is the first part of the method he showed on how to best do psychic tubing. I think it looks dope. This began with a 50-50 blend of Averland Sunset and Uriel Yellow to get a really nice, distinctive kind of yellow for these tubings. I made sure to rub it all through, going into the recesses and all that jazz, but not spilling over, of course, because that would not be sightly. Took a fair few coats to get right, and obviously yellow being yellow, it was pretty stubborn, didn't really add any Lamia Medium to it, but the result did look very good for it. I then realised I forgot to paint the keys gold, which I promptly and very bashfully did, and then the same on the skulls on his gauntlets there. Again, running theme. This is going to happen some more, don't you worry. I then touch up on the Macragge Blues that had some paint spilled onto them, just to keep them looking nice and tidy. Don't worry, we'll mess him up later, right near the end. He's looking mighty good at this point. Mighty good. Nearly forgot you. And of course, another missing gold piece, but it's promptly done, and looking promptly dope for it. I then go over the handle of his sword in red, and add the red to the cable as well, Mephiston Red. I then lightly go over the glyphs on the sword with some Corax White. Even during a Nurgle invasion, the work never stops. And if I did any spills, I gently went over them with Fenrisian Grey. It's hard to get good lighting when the Nurgle is there, but it looks excellent for it. And that right there is all of his base colours. Now it's time to bring him to life using shading. Okay, so, quick point to make here. I got a new camera at this point, the one I'm using right now as it happens, but while figuring out how to make it work the way I wanted it to work, I unfortunately lost a little bit of footage. Gotta love tech, right? But thankfully there was only one thing that was missed. Over all the blue areas, I added a washed down Nuln Oil. 50-50 Lamian Medium and Nuln Oil, and then just washed over all the blue parts of the model here, and it looked very good for it. Very slight, but very good, so add that into your list, folks. Anyways, onwards we go. Oh, and by the way, if you're enjoying this, please consider liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. Helps me out a great deal. Maybe consider joining a YouTube membership. I don't know, you know, whatever you feel like. Anyways, onward we roll. So with a new camera up and ready, for this point I added a thinned down with Lamia Medium Agrax Earthshade to the cloak all over. I thinned it down because, well, I didn't want it thick. I wanted the colour underneath to really shine through, but I still wanted it to have that deeper, darker, grimier tone to it, and it looked really good. But then what I did, I took my liner brush and took some straight Agrax, not thinned down, and then ran it through the deeper recesses of the cloak to really help the shadows and deep parts of it just pop out. It looked really good for it. I was very pleased. And so was he. I then jumped into the face and decided to cover that with some Rakarth Flesh shade, which as you can see was just disappearing into the back of his hood. It was really annoying, like unreasonably annoying, but eventually with a massive puddle of the stuff dumped on his face, I managed to get it to stick. No idea what was going on there, for real. Then I decided, while I've got the Reikland Flesh Head on my brush, I may as well do the shading for the golds as well. I add to the sword hilt, I add to the various skulls around the place, and of course I add it to the trim of his pauldron. Now he's really starting to look like a divine ultramarine. I then add Collier Green onto his sword blade, just very lightly, letting it pool around the glyphs as well. I try to keep it as even as I can on both sides of the blade, and it starts to look like it has this beautiful force-like sheen to it. I then take the Nuln Oil, and although I've already washed it with some very watered down Nuln Oil, I take my liner brush, some straight Nuln Oil, and I go into the deepest recesses and work my way over all the blue armor panels of the model, making all of the recesses just pop beautifully, including around the edges of the edge of the pauldron there. And also in the recesses between the fingers and whatnot. The organic places like the fabric of the cloak and the gloves, they have lots of good places you can really highlight with Nuln Oil. Right, all that shading's already making an excellent difference. It's really starting to look absolutely dope at this point. But now comes arguably one of the most important steps, and yet also one of the most time-consuming, possibly soul-numbing, and mind-destroying parts of the process. I'm kidding, it's all good fun. And that's the highlighting. I suppose it's not actually that bad when you're doing just a single model, but if you're doing a whole army in a single go, then, well, you have infinitely more patience than I do. So for the first highlight, I used Terminatus Stone. It's my first dry brush paint I've ever used. And I must say, with a nice, harsh, bristled brush, it really helps bring out those high points in the cloak. It looks absolutely divine for it, and makes it look nice and organic, like it's covered in just stuff from the world, you know? It looks so good, and it's definitely worth doing if you have a cloak of this kind of colour. Being careful not to get it on other colours, of course, which somehow I managed to do with quite a lot of success, I think. But yes, the results, very, very pleased with them. So next we jumped into the Pallid Witch Flesh, which I immediately jumped onto the parchments. I did add a little too much on the back there, as you can see, but thankfully on the fronts it wasn't nearly as strong, thankfully. I just decided I'd add some shading to the back or something at a later date, maybe Agrax Earthshade. It still looks very good either way. Then we jump into the Macragge Blue again, alongside Calgar Blue for a nice 50-50 mix. And with this we do some nice thick highlights. Not per se edge highlighting, but nearly edge highlighting, just going along all of the edges that we can see. I personally like the excessive edge highlighting. Some people think that it's too much, it gets a bit more quote-unquote cartoony at that point, but I personally very much like it, and towards the heavy metal sort of look. I do thoroughly enjoy it, so that's kind of what I go for, and one day I hope to achieve something similar. So yes, this is the first bout of highlighting we do on the blue, with the 50-50 mix of Macragge and Calgar. Try to place them down as evenly as I can, but as you can see here, it doesn't always quite work out. Oh, and on the pauldron as well, I don't quite go right up to the edge. I leave the Nuln Oil that I put there on show, because that is a recess, technically, after all. And I feel it looks excellent for it. Very dope. Very, very dope. Even on the back, exceptionally dope. So next we move on to the more classic style of edge highlighting, which is straight Calgar Blue and running the side of one's brush along the edges that we wish to highlight. Works so well with what we've already done there. On the pauldron, I still had to do it with the tip of my brush, and more refined than the 50-50 I did, and again keeping the Nuln Oil intact, but it looks really, really good for it. We also do some on the sides, anywhere that catches the light effectively. You have to be kind of thoughtful of what direction the light is coming from and then apply it accordingly. You can't just kind of do it everywhere, similar to what I was doing with the 50-50 mix. Even on the face there, being extra careful not to get it on the skin part of his face, of course. Remember guys, just take your time and enjoy what you're doing. Revel in what it will be like when it's complete, because it's worth it. It's worth it. Even the tippy toes don't escape me. Alright, excellent, and with that we now move on to the next step of the highlighting, which is Fenrisian Grey. It's the same method as the Calgar, but being much more selective. The places that really catch the light, or the places you really want to be eye-catching. But for the most part, it's all the places that are upturned, the harsh edges, or again, just things you want to be drawing the eye, such as the pauldron. But other than that, anything upturned or harsh, they're always a good kind of go-to for Fenrisian Grey. And then the last point of the blue highlighting is with Stormhost Silver. This only needs to go on a few points, such as corners. Corners of upturned areas that are really catching the glint of that light. In my case, I did it on the Psychic Hood and on the corners of some of the backpacks, and just a couple other small spots, but it really does not need much. And along the face as well, just to help draw the eye to it. But that was all it needed, before we moved on to the Macragge Brown, to start doing similar with the browns that we'd already done. Doing some rough highlights with it. The reason I don't do a 50-50 blend with the brown is because brown just doesn't need it. It's not that kind of vivid colour. Plus, it presents its own challenges with highlighting these browns because they're fabrics for the most part. So you've got to think of things like knuckles and bones in the hands and whatnot. The leather of the book, it's not so bad, but it still does deserve its attention. He's a librarian after all. I do seriously wonder how this book remains stuck to his belt there. Is it like magnets? Is it a clasp? Come on, focus, damn it. No, is it magnets or a clasp or something or whatnot? It's just, I don't know. We shall see. Well, we won't see. What am I talking about? We can only guess. Then, of course, there's also the inside of the holster while avoiding the black. So that was a fun challenge before moving on to the Deathclaw Brown. Apparently the whole lid comes off as well, it would seem, when one isn't careful. But yes, the most highest upturned edges, or the most profound edges, is what you hit with the Deathclaw Brown. And when it's all good and done, the eye drawn to all the places you want, and a bit of pockmarks done onto the book as well, as you can see there, and a layer added to the belt, it's all looking good and ready on the browns. And I'm very pleased with it, I must say. Next we go onto the face. I give it an extra layer of Reikland Flesh shade, just because it was still being a bit funky. But then after that layer, we then jump out with the Flayed One Flesh, to get it looking, well, hopefully not so flayed, but I only really add it along the brow, just to help bring that differentiation to the skin tones out. I then add some Evil Sunz Scarlet to the red of the pipework and some on the hilt as well. It could have also done with some Wild Riders red, but I figured it was small enough to not really need it. I then jump to edge highlighting the edge of the sword with some Fenrisian Grey, just to really bring out that nice sharp edge, make it look like a blade. And it really starts to look good for it, I must say. I also add an extra wide sweep to the tip of the sword to kind of emphasize it narrowing down to a point. I then jump out the blue horror and add a light layer of it there as well, just to emphasize the force nature of it. I didn't go too far, because as you can see it didn't need it. Then I traced a line of it down the center of the blade, and I didn't really like it. I wiped it, I smeared it, and oh dear. So I got the Colia green again and just went over it, and then frankly that was enough. That was all it needed, and thankfully I managed to recover it. It looked really good for it. I was very pleased. I then added a bit of Stormhost Silver just to the tip there, and running a little bit up the blade perhaps, but mostly for the tip, just again emphasize that point to make it look, well, pointy, like a sword should be. And it's looking very dope for it. I then decide, while I have the Stormhost Silver out, to start highlighting the metals around the area. Just on, again, the raised edges, the upturned edges, the bits that I wanted the eye drawn to. Did it on the vents, did it on the exhaust, did it on all the buckles. And again, looks really good for it. Stormhost on Leadbelcher just looks... something about it that looks particularly divine. I don't know what it is, nor do I care to know. I decided to do the same with Liberator Gold onto the Retributor Armour Golds. Upturned parts of the sword hilt, as we can see there, on the pommel as well, and of course around all the skulls he has across his place, all the skulls I kept missing, but now again, very divine for it when it's the metallics. And of course, around the edge of the pauldron as well, and then the pauldron's just, chef's kiss, mwah, I love it. I was very pleased with this so far. He's looking incredibly dope at this point. Now it's just the final few highlights before we move on, and part of this final highlight is going to include Corax White, which goes on the edges of the parchments here. Not too much, you only need a little bit, otherwise it looks too scaring, but it suits it very well. I also decided to add some into the pages of the book itself because it was looking just a bit, well, not booky. But then I feel, ooh, it's just a little bit too white, so I decided to jump to my Seraphim Sepia in order to just go through the pages a little bit, make it a bit more coffee stained, but then, even then it didn't quite feel right, so I jumped to Agrax Earthshade next, just to go over it again, and the parchments as well, very, very lightly, just to make them look extra dirty. I mean, they're flapping about in the battlefield after all, which is not practical for a battlefield, even if it does look really cool as all heck. Plus, it's the chance to darken down the back of the parchments. Next, we jump onto the Eshin Grey to do the highlights for the black. There aren't many black points on this particular model for me, mainly the gun holster and a few little bits. I also add a bit of a grip look onto the pistol before jumping onto the book strap there and getting that nice and highlighted up. Then we jump to Dawnstone to do the same again, but much, much thinner, if you would. Really catch the high points, if you would. And then adding a huge bit for some reason to the book strap there, and then saying that the blacks are done. Hey, remember Tabletop Ready's way to do psychic tubing? We're doing the rest of that now. First, it's Flash Gitz Yellow. Just sort of slapping it on, going into the recesses along the front of the tubing on both sides of his torso. Really starting to make it look nice and highlighted before we move on to the next piece, which is Screaming Skull. I wouldn't have thought of Screaming Skull myself, but it turns out for highlighting bright yellow, it actually works really, really well. Definitely remembering that in future for future yellow things. But I now must again give a big thank you to Tabletop Ready for this next part here. The glowing, the fancy glow effects. I've never tried anything like it before. And his method, especially for psychic glow, I think is absolutely dope. And, well, here's what he showed. So first I quickly do the stem to the psychic orb there, silver, because I forgot to do it, well, Leadbelcher specifically. I then coat the orbs proper in Temple Guard Blue, start with a nice bright colour, really help it stand out, and they really do look quite dope for it, I must say. And then I get a glaze of Sotek Green. Now a glaze is simply watering it down with straight water right up until it's transparent, well, translucent to be accurate, and then just glazing around the item where you want the light to be cast out from the, in this case, orbs. I also decided to wash a bit over the front of the backpack right behind his head there to sort of show light reflecting off of it. I know it's cloth, but they're fairly bright little orbs, and for me the challenge was trying to get a gradient from the Sotek Green back to the cloth. Now, I don't know anything about stippling, so I just resorted to wiping it with my thumb, and honestly, I was pretty pleased with the result of it, especially for a first ever try. I then go over the orbs again with a glazing of Baharoth Blue, just to help make them pop a little bit more, and a little around the edge of them as well, but not too much, before going over them with some Blue Horror, just a bit of Blue Horror, just to really help them pop out. And for all that, it looks absolutely excellent. I'm super pleased with it. I then jump into the hand where his psychic energy is coming from to tip his invisible fedora. I get some straight Sotek Green and coat the inside with it, before then doing some very rough highlights with Temple Guard Blue going along the fingers, even along the outside of the fingers there, just around the outside of the palm, and even a bit between his fingers on the top of his hand, as if to show light is just coming through them because of that psychic power, you know? We then jump to the Baharoth Blue, where I do more refined highlights on the higher points of his hand, like the bits of the palm under the thumb that are sticking up, bits around the finger as well. It's a very tucked away detail, but it is an eye-catching detail nonetheless. We then jump to the Blue Horror, which I use for his fingertippies and the highest points of his hands, before going back to Sotek Green to actually start highlighting again around the model's face and the cloak and the bits that are catching light from his glowing hand. It went out fairly far because this was the dim colours, and again, not too good at any kind of stippling or gradient, but then I jump to the Temple Guard Blue and start edge highlighting again over that, but closer to the hand. Again, brighter colour to simulate brighter light reflecting off it as well. I particularly did so on the face where the metal is, and even a bit down the piping. And even for just those two colours, it's really starting to come together nicely. I then add a little more Sotek Green to the face because I figured it would probably wrap around it. And then disaster strikes when I'm trying to paint the eyes with Blue Horror. I managed to get it over half his face. So using a damp cloth, I managed to wipe it off and then paint the base colour back over it again. And thankfully it saved. I try again, and this time with an awful lot more success, I'm happy to say. We got the nice glowing eyes as he's unleashing his psychic power. I didn't worry too much about lighting up around them because they're already lit up around them thanks to his hand. Being extra careful. But I'm very pleased with the result of that extra care. While I have the liner brush out, I then decide to go over the script of his parchments, and I've got to say, it's actually the best script I've ever done so far, I believe. I do it on the bookmark as well. I'm feeling very stoked now at this point. Then I realise transfers are the thing. I measure it up, but then I realise it's basically covered. There's no point using the transfer. I decide instead to try painting it on by hand with Corax White. I'm gripping my teeth, clenching everything, and amazingly I do it. I managed to get a nice curve in there. Transfers? Who needs them, right? For real, guys. Transfers still make me want to just... I don't know what I can say without getting demonetized. But then I realise I've also got to do that top edge there of the ultramarine symbol. Again, nervously, I managed to pull it out, and then I get the liner brush to kind of drag the naturally curved edge into corners, since this is the only part where corners are showing. And then with a little bit of care, a little bit of extra Corax White on my brush, I managed to drag it out into an acceptable amount of corner. I'm so pleased with it. Everything unclenches, I relax. I'm just feeling super dope. I do a little bit of tidy up around it, of course, just to make it extra refined, because I feel it was a little too close to the front. And then after some struggle, I got it just right. At least I think just right. We then move on to the base, which begins with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Just a single layer, doesn't have to be too precise or anything, I always figured to myself, but it also goes over his platform he stood on, his favourite little rock platform. This serves as a jumping off point for me because it's similar colour to the Astro Granite, which is where the main draw of it all is. It's like a cement, you just apply it with a scraper of some kind. Try to do it so it looks natural and even. I don't want it to look like it's been scraped on, but at the same time I don't want it to be super smooth either. I don't want it too flattened down, so it's trying to find that balance, again, between making it look natural and making it look even. Thankfully I've done this with virtually every model. I then scrape the excess off the side before we go to the Nuln Oil to really get the shading in there. This is when, once it's dry, it really starts to look like old moon rock. Just, it looks excellent, I love it so. Before moving on to finishing the base, I decide to add an extra bit of highlighting using Wraithbone, because I feel there's just some points of the cloak that's so raised, it just needs the eye to be drawn to it even more so. So with very thinned down, with water, a bit of Wraithbone, I just go over these higher points. Some were a little bit bright, but I decide in the end I can just go over them very gently with a bit of Agrax Earthshade if I want to. But in the end, I didn't have to. In the end, the result was excellent. So, the final bit of dry brushing, it's using Dawnstone. Dry brush uses just tissue paper in this case, because I want the dusty look that taking all the moisture out of the brush provides. Because again, he's on a dusty planet, so I want the dust to be all over him. It's about getting that fine balance though, between making sure you don't ruin all the lovely details you've made, but making it look true to life. So obviously the bottom of the cloak gets thoroughly dusted up, and as I move higher up the model, I lessen and lessen and lessen, all the way up until he's finally looking good. Very dope. I then go to clean up the edge, the rim if you would, of the base with just Abaddon Black, because that's how it's supposed to be done apparently. It looks very good to have a nice and neat base as well, especially with the rough and ready Astrogranite there. But of course, I have to add my trademark, the signature rimmed Macragge Blue. I don't do the whole rim anymore, now I just do the very bottom edge there. It still has my trademark, and yet it's not quite so overbearing. But yeah, there he is, looking good and done, and I was super pleased. Couldn't be happier, though I look forward to improving more. Back to future Ross. And that, my friends, leaves us with this fine fellow here. Get in focus, damn you. Why you know? There we go. So a lot of people may feel that I've made him too dirty, but I personally like it. I love the grime and the dirt and whatnot, especially given how awesome and vibrant the model actually looks. I like that. If you guys don't, you don't have to do that final dry brush as much as I did. And that's the beauty of it, because it's the very last thing you do. You can decide just how much you do or don't want to do it. That's the beauty of being a painter. You have autonomy. You can choose. Yeah, this is a new format of me filming these types of videos, so let me know what you think of it. If I should bother doing it again or not. You know, feedback. Well, yes indeed, my friend, that is how I painted my Phobos Librarian. I hope you enjoyed watching me do that. Maybe you learned something as well, or at least learned what not to do. But yes, thank you so much for watching. As they all say, please do comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It helps me out a great deal. Consider joining the channel's Discord. We have a great community there already. And you may want to consider becoming a YouTube member if you want additional benefits. Plus, again, helps me out, makes me happy, makes everything good. Yeah, so until next time, guys, remember, the Emperor is always guiding your brush.